I've always been a nerd. And yeah, I think a friend invited me to a con, or I saw a flyer for like Emerald City Comic Con like years ago. And I was like, this is a thing that people do. like, so, and I knew that people dressed up. So I didn't go and not dress up. I like fully made like a Chewbacca like fur dress and showed up one day at a con and was like, cool, these are my people. And yeah, it was all downhill from there.
I'm Sari Mitnick, and this is Seamwork Radio, where we tell stories about the surprising ways that sewing impacts our lives. Cosplay is something that's simultaneously deeply personal and very social. Introverts, extroverts, and really any combination of the two can find their space within cosplay. So if you aren't familiar with cosplay, it's short for costume play, and people across the world spend hours making costumes to transform into their favorite characters, from comic books, anime, and movies to historical figures, mystical beasts, and even creatures of their own invention. If you know how to sew clothing, you already have a ton in common with most cosplayers. You care a lot about self-expression, you might have a near-obsessive attention to detail, and you're part of a worldwide community of people who just love to nerd out about their craft. But what happens to the art of cosplay during a pandemic, when we can only see the top halves of our costumes online and fabric and props are hard to source? What happens when cosplay competitions, smelly convention center food, and after parties are all canceled? In this episode, Meg talks to 6 cosplayers about their sewing practice over the last year during the pandemic. These 6 makers show us how clothing connects us to each other, and why we'll always continue to make clothes or costumes, even when we can't be together.
It was 1939 in New York City, and Myrtle R. Douglas stepped into the first ever World Science Fiction Convention in Manhattan. She was wearing a sci-fi-inspired romper and cape. She'd sewed it herself, using fabric from a former shiny, silky ball gown. She made her boyfriend, Forrest Ackerman, a coordinating sci-fi-inspired outfit with giant metallic shoulder pads and a futuristic silhouette. Together, they donned the world's first cosplay. Myrtle, known affectionately throughout history as Moroyo, and her boyfriend had recently started a science fiction fanzine, a publication written for and by science fiction fans. Shortly after the zine's launch, they had attended that convention with 200 fellow sci-fi geeks. And now, 82 years later, modern comic conventions bring hundreds of thousands of fans together each year to celebrate their fandoms. And cosplay is a $45 billion hobby and creative industry. So what is it about cosplay that is so entrancing? Why do people want to spend a bunch of money and countless hours to transform themselves into someone else? Meet Jillian. Jillian is an avid cosplayer and the author of The Hero's Closet, Sewing for Cosplay and Costuming. She wrote a book for people like her, people who love to sew, but who need some help with techniques that are specific to cosplay and costumes. I asked Jillian, why do people cosplay?
So this is a very individual, like every cosplayer is going to have a different take on this. I am very much a process-focused kind of cosplayer. Just because the things that I do tend to be so time-consuming, I like to really get into the details and the techniques and try new things and experiment and sometimes indulge in 250 hours of hand embroidery, which I have done. So the actual wearing of the costume can't even come close to the amount of time it takes to build the costume to begin with. So the building kind of has to be its own reward. Like it's fun to wear them and to run around with my friends at a convention and get photos taken and whatever, but that's icing on the cake for me. It's not the point of it all. But there are other cosplayers who it's all about the big moment and it's all about getting the fancy professional photo shoot done and having, great cinematic pictures to share with everybody. And there are lots of ways to enjoy cosplay, and it's very individual.
One of the big thrills of cosplay is the process, the sewing, sculpting, and building of your costume, the actual craft of cosplay.
I spent several years making clothes, and especially office clothes for myself. I learned how to make work pants and made a lot of nice wool trousers. But at some point that kind of got old. There's only so much business casual I can make, right? So I was looking for a new challenge around 2014, and that's when I arrived at Cosplay. The first real cosplay that I made that was not like a Halloween costume was Ezio from Assassin's Creed 2. And I picked it because I knew how I wanted to make it, but it involved a lot of new interesting things that I hadn't tried before. I dyed my own linen to the exact right gray color in my apartment bathtub. I hand embroidered the detailing on the coat. That was dozens of hours of hand embroidery. I carved my own linoleum stamp to emboss velvet for the lining of the coattails. I did honeycomb smocking on the shirt sleeves. It was all a whole grab bag of different techniques that I'd never tried before. That's kind of how it all started. Like, something clicked, and I have had some kind of project going pretty much ever since.
Cosplayers take sewing to another level with their materials, sculpting realistic props like swords, boots, and even incorporating electrical elements into their costumes. Melanie cosplays as Dila Designs. She's dabbled in all sorts of prop building alongside her sewing.
I've gotten really into making resin and like sculpting and crafting and working with foam. Like, I've done a little bit of everything. We're not just using fabric, we're also like trying to sew foam into our cosplays to make them more stiff, and like using other materials that probably traditional sewers don't want to mess with. And they're like, what is this craft foam you speak of? You know, and we're trying to figure out, can we stick this through our sewing machine? Is it gonna break? I've definitely, jammed up my sewing machine a few times trying to sew random materials that a sewing machine probably isn't made for.
Aside from the actual building of costumes, another thrill that cosplay provides is the physical transformation of yourself into someone else, usually a character whose story means something to you. Emily is an avid cosplayer who's on Instagram as Our Shield Maiden. She practices cosplay on many levels, so I asked her, what does cosplay feel like?
I think it depends on the cosplay. Sometimes it's like a really giddy feeling, but I do kind of different levels of cosplay as well. Like, some cosplays are just like closet cosplays, which is just using what I already own. Some cosplays are going to be things that I just buy from a store because I really like my character, but I don't want to make it. I just want to like embody that character, I guess. Those are really fun. I do a lot of nostalgia cosplays. I think those are the ones that really evoke a lot of emotion, because I'm like, oh my gosh, like I grew up with this character and now I am this character. Those are really fun to have. And then there's competition pieces that I make, and those take me like 500 hours to put together. Like, I work on them for months and months, even years in the case of some of them. And so for those, like, there's a lot more ownership and a lot more, you really feel like you have become the character because you've been building it out for so long. So that's really fun too. But I also really love just putting on princess gowns and like running through my apartment. So there's always that.
Emily recognizes that there is something extra about cosplay compared to sewing a t-shirt. They are related crafts, but two totally different creative practices.
I've never made a t-shirt though. See, that's the thing for me, like everyday wear is really magical to me. Like, one of my friends makes like these adorable vintage dresses and she wears them to work and she posts them. And I'm always in awe of that because I don't know why, like my brain just doesn't process that way, where like I'm like, oh, this is so cute, I would wear it tomorrow, I'm gonna make it and then wear it. Like, I can't. I'm missing that piece. I'm gonna spend a million hours on this and wear it once. That's where my brain is at. I don't know why. Something's broken. It makes so much more sense though to be like, I'm gonna make this so that I can use it. Like, there's something about the practicality, I guess, that I really gravitate toward.
Emily is very aware of the contrast between her everyday style and her cosplay style, something many cosplayers can relate to.
It goes back to that emotional connection, I think, for cosplayers. I think a lot of people cosplay also to almost realize themselves in the way that they wish that they were perceived. Like, my personal style, I actually had somebody ask me about this other day. My personal style in everyday versus my cosplay style are vastly different. I really am pretty minimal. I'm not perceived probably as being nerdy. It's not something I wear on my sleeve. I wear a lot of monochromatic colors. Everything's very basic. I wear a lot of black. I wear a lot of gray. I wear leggings and sweatpants. But then when I cosplay, like I said, it's almost like an alter ego in a way, where it's very extra, huge gowns.
This feeling that Emily describes of having an alter ego is the power that cosplayers find in their builds or costumes. Anne-Marie discovered sewing when she got into theater for acting, but found herself in the costume shop instead. Since college, she's been sewing for a living and regularly participates in historical costuming and cosplay.
As far as favorite cosplay, I think my favorite is my last one that I did, which was Beauregard from Critical Role. It is the most niche thing that I think I've ever... how do I describe this in an elevator pitch?
If you're not getting Anne-Marie's reference, Critical Role is a web series that started in 2015, in which a group of actors play Dungeons & Dragons. This is the perfect example of a niche cosplay, something that you might not recognize unless you are deeply embedded in that particular fandom.
And it's just the most beautiful storytelling that's kind of blossoming in front of you. And the character of Beauregard became strangely important to me. And I didn't realize how important she was to me until I started making the cosplay and embodying that character. As well as the fact that cosplay, in my mind, the biggest boon of it is the community that it comes with. Especially with Critical Role fans, the community is just, it's you find people who recognize who you are, can bond over the 400-500 hours of content that there is in this fandom, and you will instantly be able to chat with each other for days on end. There's just so much really human connection that comes with that particular fandom. That's one of the things that I thought was so really unique about that particular cosplay experience when I made Beauregard and wore Beauregard for. And it was also right before the pandemic, funnily enough, so.
Many cosplayers love to show off their work. In cosplay, sewing can be truly exhibitionist. Mia May is a cosplayer who recognizes the role that public self-expression plays in cosplay.
There's definitely an exhibitionist aspect to what we do. And there's sometimes a competitive aspect too. I mean, I've definitely heard just people be like, did you see her seams? Oh my God, she didn't even finish them. And it's just oh my God, get over yourself. Why wasn't that a blind zipper? You could totally see her zipper. It's just come on, people. But I think that one of the ways that we differ a little bit is, when you're taking on a sewing project for yourself, and I'm oh, I just want to make a jacket or make a shirt. It's you can go to the store and you can just pick out a fabric and, be ooh, these buttons look pretty, and just kind of go from there. Whereas for a lot of cosplay, you're creating something that is already created. You are creating something that is recognizable. You have to find your level, your threshold of accuracy. I mean, right now I'm working on an 1890s Victorian dress from a TV show, and I have 5 friends across the country looking for a very specific green striped taffeta that I'm trying to track down. It's there's a neuroses, is that the word that goes with it? A manicness for details that I think you end up stuck in a little bit.
If you consider the thrill of building a costume, along with the thrill of transforming yourself into someone else, Doing these things alongside other like-minded, nerdy people is the ultimate thrill of cosplay. Cosplay has, at its roots, the same communal aspect of sewing or quilting or other fiber crafts. Our clothes, yes, including costumes, connect us to each other. Anne-Marie likens cosplay to a quilting circle.
I think that it's really nice to be able to have something that is actually creating something, especially something as practical as clothing and sewing, because it's an art and a craft that has existed for as long as humans and humanity has been around, and it's changed and evolved so much. But there's something really communal about that particular craft. You know, sitting in a circle with a bunch of people who are all working on their craft and telling stories or talking about their families.
Both sewing and cosplay exist at this really interesting intersection between the individual and community, between self-expression as an individual and belonging to a group of like-minded creatives. If you kick the community of a quilting circle up a notch or two, you get cosplay. You pour hours of your life into creating an outfit, and when you wear it outside, someone runs up to you and totally understands the character you're trying to be. It's an instant connection between you and this other person. This is really where cosplay becomes radical, and you can see this happen live right in front of you if you go to a convention.
I've always been a nerd. And I think a friend invited me to a con, or I saw a flyer for like Emerald City Comic Con years ago. And I was like, this is a thing that people do. And I knew that people dressed up. So I didn't go and not dress up. I fully made a Chewbacca fur dress and showed up one day at a con and was like, cool, these are my people. And yeah, it was all downhill from there.
Going to a convention is a highlight for many cosplayers. Jillian describes going to New York City Comic Con, her local con.
You get dressed up, and then if you're taking the subway to the convention, you probably throw a jacket over your ridiculous outfit. Or, you put some of it in a bag, or I've definitely gotten on the subway with a prop sword in a garment bag, because you don't want to be running around New York with a giant sword.
If you haven't been to one, comic conventions involve thousands of geeks, nerds, and their allies that all come together to celebrate their assorted fandoms. Conference halls are packed with people sporting t-shirts with their favorite comic book characters, as well as people who have completely transformed themselves into these characters.
You take the subway into the convention and kind of get your costume in order in the hallway and then run out to meet everybody. And then it's 100,000 people in a big old convention center, but you have something in common with almost all of them. And, people recognize your character and they'll address you by the character's name. They'll shout across the room, hey, Ezio, hi, I don't know you, but I'm going to, act like I'm excited to see you.
Conventions are at the heart of many people's cosplay. And there are now so many different kinds of cosplay conventions. There are big comic conventions, anime conventions, video game conventions, board game conventions. Emily remembers her first experience at an anime convention.
I was living in Paris and I saw a poster up for an anime convention and I was like, I'm gonna go to this. So I went to one and it was so much fun. I was super broke and I spent all my grocery money on the money that would have gone to food. I bought the accurate dress for Melody Pond from Doctor Who, and who's a character that occurs in one episode. I just really loved her. And yeah, that was my first cosplay. And I remember sending a message to one of my friends being like, do you think this is dumb of me to spend money for food on a dress? It was like $75 for the dress. And so I was like, I'm not gonna have groceries. It's fine. And she was like, you know what? This is something you really love. Do it. And I did.
Even people who don't consider themselves cosplayers often find themselves entwined in the fandom of comic conventions. Simone sews her own wardrobe. She runs a garment label company and is an all-around fan of geek culture. She doesn't consider herself a cosplayer, but her kids love to go to comic conventions.
I love going to Comic-Con because I think that there is something for everyone. That's one reason why I think it's really cool about like Comic-Con and just like this geek culture is that like when you go to San Diego, like there's so many different kinds of geeks and you're like, wow, it's not just me.
Simone sees the power that cosplay has for her kids when they dress up, go to a convention, and people notice their costumes. One time, her daughter dressed up as a popular Marvel comic book character, Loki.
We paper machéed her horn helmet, and that was just epic. And she wore it to Comic-Con, like all days at Comic-Con. She wore it to San Diego, she wore it to Salt Lake, she wore it for a couple of years. And anytime anyone stopped her, they would just be like, you know, they'd yell out Loki, and she'd have this huge smile on her face. Or they'd ask her, did you make your helmet? And she's like, yeah. And everyone was like, what? Or, you know, people dressed up in Thor costumes would yell to her brother. And she was like, yes! It was amazing.
In early 2020, cosplayers of all ages were, as usual, knee-deep in projects, commissions, custom builds, and prop making. And then on April 17th, 2020, San Diego Comic-Con, one of the largest conventions in the entire world, announced it was canceling in-person events for the very first time in its 51-year history. COVID-19 had put an end to the comic convention season for the year. The sewing paused, props sat unfinished, photo shoots were canceled, meet and greets were refunded, movie theaters closed, and it seemed like thousands of people would suddenly be out of work. The entire cosplay community was left scratching their heads. Should they keep sewing? Should they buy more foam and make some props? Should they just wait? What will they do this year without comic conventions?
Coming up, cosplayers react to the pandemic with their own powerful superpower, creativity.
The craft kind of pulled me back out of it because it is a very useful coping mechanism when the world is stressful to be able to, you know, dig in and make something.
This podcast is created by the team at Seamwork. We're here to help you design and sew your own wardrobe. You can check out our patterns, classes, and community by visiting us at seamwork.com. If you like the idea of creating your own wardrobe but really struggle with actually making things that you want to wear, check out our free downloadable sewing planner. It's available at seamwork.com/go/planner. It's a totally free printable PDF, and you can use it to help you create a small collection of pieces that fits your style and your real life. It'll help you to define your goals, create a palette, design some looks, and then create a queue of projects to sew. Just visit seamwork.com/go/planner, enter your email address, and then we'll send it to you right away. We'll also send you a series of emails that gives you some tips and actually helps walk you through using the planner. So again, that URL is seamwork.com/go/planner, or just check for the link in the show notes.
When we left off, San Diego Comic-Con was canceled, and conventions across the world followed suit. Cosplayers weren't only shut out of all the in-person events like costume competitions and photo shoots, but they were increasingly cut off from their supply chain. Fabric stores, notions, especially elastics, and all of the materials that they need for their props became really scarce. So what did people do? Mia May observed changes right away.
An immediate loss of motivation, I think, was the biggest thing that people ran into was, you know, in the cosplay community, conventions and being able to share your work is so much a part of the process for many people, not for everyone. But people would do costumes specifically for competitions, and they would do them specifically to share them, specifically for meetups, to go be with other members of that community. And when that went away, a lot of people that I saw just lost the motivation. They were like, why do I do this? What is the point?
In response to the pandemic, many cosplayers turned the fabric for their costumes into masks. They stopped 3D printing their props and started printing protective gear for healthcare workers. And the major conventions came up with online alternatives to keep people safe. Simone, her husband, and her kids were able to attend San Diego Comic-Con after all, from their computers at home.
Last year, San Diego Comic-Con actually had a Comic-Con at home, online panels and all that stuff, but they actually provided all like the print materials, the music, the voiceovers, and everything. And at first I was like, Comic-Con at home, that's just going to be a little bit sad. But then I was like, no, look at all these cool things that we can do. And there's like groups on, Facebook, and I was seeing how thorough people were being about it. And so I was like, we can do this. Like, we can make it a slightly more special than our everyday.
Jillian experienced an ebb and flow of motivation after New York City Comic-Con was canceled.
I went several months without really working on any projects, or I'd start things and then get frustrated with something and kick it into a corner and not pick it up again. I remember I was starting a costume and then I put fusible on the wrong side of the fabric and I just chucked it out. I was over it.
Cosplayers in general went one of two ways at the start of the pandemic. They stopped making things, or they made it work.
There's two sides of, I think, the pandemic. One side is a lot of people have dropped out of the cosplay community. I've just never seen them again. They just stopped posting. They just kind of went dark.
While some cosplayers dropped out of the cosplay community, much of the cosplay community took a hint from the comic conventions and moved entirely online. Like many of us, this even happened on Zoom.
And then other people just started doing stuff for fun. Like I know a lot of people started doing like just closet cosplays just because it was a chance to put on makeup and look pretty and, or just putting on cosplays for Zoom meetings and just finding the excuse to have that moment of getting dressed up. People were having like parties over Zoom where everyone was dressed up and costumed and themed.
Discord channels, TikTok, and Facebook groups for cosplayers got more members. Podcasts really took off, and people around the world were able to connect a little more conveniently because people still craved that feeling of belonging to a group of like-minded people. People missed their nerdy friends. Melanie noticed some immediate creative shifts among cosplayers.
I definitely noticed a lot more people focusing on actually creating tutorial content, which is really awesome because, they have the time to, nobody was rushing to get to a con. So they had time to, sit down and document how they were building things. And so I've definitely seen a huge uptick in that. And definitely, I feel like a lot of people started to segue to, doing more stuff on TikTok and, doing silly little things like that to kind of pass the time and kind of keep their creativity going. So yeah, it's been really cool to see how much the community is leaning more towards education and, and also uplifting, we've had a lot of movements happening, obviously, Black Lives Matter, Stop Asian Hate and stuff.
Over the pandemic, several movements for social justice in America, namely Black Lives Matter and Stop Asian Hate, grabbed the world's attention. And these same movements were mirrored in the cosplay community. It can be tempting to think of cosplay as this all-inclusive utopia where you can become someone else without any consequence. But it turns out that when everyone transforms themselves into someone else, the same problems that we have in our society continue. We're just wearing costumes. Emily remembers being explicitly told that she could not dress in the ball gowns of antebellum fashion because she is not white.
A lot of the communities that are out there are very exclusive, and exclusivity is something that kept me out of creating for a really long time. So you have to be a certain thing to be in those communities, whether that's a socioeconomic status, whether that's a certain gender, or whether that's a certain whatever it is. And I don't believe in that because that's something that kind of made a bad taste for sewing in my youth. I've talked about this before, but I wanted to start, or I've talked about this on Instagram before, but I wanted to start doing historical costumes when I was pretty young, probably 11 or 12. I was big into American Girl dolls. And I was like, yes, I'm going to go do Civil War reenactments. This is going to be awesome. And I was like, I want to wear the big crinoline dresses and diamonds and stuff. That's just my personality. And I talked to some girls who I knew did reenactments, and they were like, oh no, you're going to have to be a slave. And I was like, what? And they were like, yes, because it has to be historically accurate. So we want to make sure, that you would be historically accurate. Therefore, you can't wear these things. You can't be in this space. And that's something that I fight against every day, even with cosplay. Why can't I wear a dress that would be at a ball in the late 19th century? Why? Everyone is dead from that time. Nobody is gonna rise up and be like, oh, she would have actually been enslaved at this time.
In true celebration of the community behind sewing and cosplay as a craft, Emily wants to create a space where anyone feels welcome, regardless of race, size, gender, or socioeconomic status. If you are Black, you can wear any historical gown you can dream up, or you can cosplay as a Disney princess. If you are curvy, you can sew a dress when you can't find one in the store. And if you need to use a thrifted bedsheet to make your costume because fabric is outside of your budget, you're totally welcome to join in. After the pandemic, Emily actually started a sew-along for an 18th century corset, a historical piece that is quite tough to sew. She expected about 10 other makers to join, but 80 people quickly signed up, and now she will host these sew-alongs each season, working with curvy cosplayers to ensure that all body types are included. Doesn't her idea kind of remind you a bit of a traditional quilting circle? It's the same creative social gathering, but it's online and with a group of diverse makers who are sewing their own corsets.
That's kind of what I'm fighting against by making this community is I just have no interest in that. I have no interest in that mindset. I don't care what people look like. I don't care what materials they're using. Use whatever you have accessible. People are making mock-ups out of old cereal boxes, and it was the coolest thing I've ever seen. That is one of the most beautiful things somebody used a dog food bag also. I love seeing that. That makes me happy.
Just as there are creative people fighting for equality in all aspects of society, there are creative makers in the cosplay community that are doing the same thing within their own fandoms. Mia, May, and Melanie are part of the team behind SheProp, a worldwide online community of cosplayers who identify as women, non-binary, trans, and two-spirit. Mia May explains their mission.
SheProp is a safe community for women, trans, non-binary, two-spirit people to come together and collaborate, ask questions, share their work in a safe environment. And it's, safe from transphobia, homophobia, body shaming, general misogyny is not accepted there at all.
As Melanie explains, it turns out that superheroes have to fight gender roles as much as they have to fight crime.
Mansplaining is essentially why we started this group. We love our male counterparts, but sometimes we just want, we still get constructive criticism. We still ask for that within our group, but we just wanted a safe space for beginners to advance people to share their work, share their process, share their knowledge, and be able to uplift others within the community.
Inclusive communities within cosplay are not uncommon, but they also aren't mainstream. As cosplayers adjust to a post-pandemic life, they are craving even more accessibility, more inclusivity, so that everyone can grow their skills. The SheProp team recognizes that a big barrier comes down to skill level. People feel like their costumes aren't good enough, so they are worried that they don't belong in cosplay.
We have a mix of everywhere from novice sewers to super advanced sewers, and that's mixed in a lot with the foam smithers. We have leather workers, the whole spectrum is there. And the best part about that is with cosplay, you might have someone who's, a master foam smither, and they want to make, a tunic for themselves, but they don't know anything about sewing. And, if that's something that they want to do, they can go on the forum and they can ask people, and there's going to be people who have done that, people who haven't done that, people who can offer a different perspective. And so it ends up becoming a very collaborative environment to learn something you haven't learned before.
The collaborative nature of cosplay is the same as the collaborative setting of a quilting circle. You're there to hang out, be creative, and make something with your hands. Clothing, whether it's your everyday garb or a gruesome outfit inspired by your favorite zombie flick, connects us. We connect through clothing. Over the pandemic, Anne-Marie recognized that clothing plays the same role in her life, whether it's everyday clothes or her cosplay.
With the pandemic, I started thinking a lot more about what it is that I sew, what it is that's like gathering in my closet, and all of these garments that are either for historical reasons or for cosplay reasons that just kind of like gather dust in my closet. And so I'm slowly trying to get a little bit more confidence to be able to either make something that will work for both, or, tease both, or be able to like allude to or work for both cosplay and everyday life, or just wear some of the historical things that I really enjoy out in real life, because why not? Not like anyone's trying to stop me from wearing, the clothes that I kind of enjoy wearing, as opposed to like jeans and a t-shirt.
During the pandemic, many cosplayers began to experiment with lighter forms of cosplay so that they don't need all the materials to sew a very involved costume that they will only wear once. Disney bounding is a popular form of light cosplay. Cosplayers wear their everyday clothes in a way that gives a little nod to their favorite Disney character, either through a certain color palette or by wearing certain accessories, like wearing red and white to shout out to Minnie Mouse's notorious polka dot bow. If you have trouble imagining this, Anne-Marie uses elements of her cosplay of Moana, a popular Disney character, in her everyday wardrobe.
I can't justify just wearing it the two cons. So I was like, okay, how is it that I can wear this in real life? How can I Disney bound this? So I'm keeping the skirt entirely, but replacing some of the other layers on it so that it still alludes to Moana, but isn't actually the exact same cosplay, which is also fine if you want to wear that. But like, for example, with Moana, she has the raffia, the grass skirt that's like underneath it. Very noisy, not very practical, uncomfortable, just like against your skin and all of that. So I made a skirt, just like a petticoat pretty much, that had like a little ruffle at the bottom that was the same tan raffia color. And I wore it underneath that for just like Disney bounding or just, life. A Tuesday.
If Anne-Marie can wear parts of her cosplay in her everyday wardrobe, that narrows the divide between home sewing and cosplay. The pandemic has made this easier because there are so many resources and tutorials online. So if you enjoy sewing your own clothes and you're wondering whether or not you can cosplay, all of these makers said enthusiastically and unequivocally, yes.
Do it! Even if it's just to like start for Halloween or whatever, like the more nerds are welcome.
Talking to all of these cosplayers, I got a sense of what the future of cosplay might look like, given how the community has adapted to the reality of a pandemic lifestyle. People want to keep making. They want access to events and information. They want to keep sewing. They want to keep building props. They want to keep experimenting with technical materials. And ultimately, they want to nerd out with their friends. But they want everyone to feel invited. Cosplay is something that we can all do together.
I really love cosplay because, again, the community is just really wonderful. There was something magical about the first time I went to a convention for the first time and realized that there were hundreds of people who were just as dorky and nerdy as me. It's everyone collectively coming together and saying, we are going to play. And that is something that I think is lost on a lot of adults. And being able to go to cosplays and conventions and Renaissance fairs, everyone is agreeing that we're all going to be able to be kids again and accept some of the strange things that people want to do because it's fun. And it is very freeing to be able to love the things that you love without any possibility of judgment or any type of just like confused looks, Everyone accepts the fact that everyone's a little bit strange.
So can the overall cosplay experience boil down to playing? Just having fun making things? Going on an adventure of your choice and creating costumes along the way? Yeah, it totally can be that simple, which means that cosplay really is for everyone. We all wear clothes, we all are fans of something, so we can all cosplay. Jillian looks forward to the next time that she can go to a con with all of her friends.
A lot of the in-person cosplay experience is just like going to the diner after a convention when you're all bedraggled and your wigs are askew and not caring. You all look like total goofs because you're out, you had a great day and now you're out getting burgers or whatever. Some of the best moments are you're exhausted after a full day in costume, and it is really uncomfortable being at a convention all day in costume. You get hot and sweaty and tired and your shoes hurt and whatever. And then at the end, you know, your makeup's smeared, you rip the wig off. That's a big one. And so you have ultimate hat hair under there. But, you know, everybody's had this experience together and now you're all kind of unwinding and eating fries while dressed as half a clown.
That was Meg Stively speaking with Jillian on Instagram as Jillian Conahan, Melanie on Instagram as Dila Designs, Emily on Instagram as Our Shield Maiden, Anne-Marie on Instagram as Silken Stitches, Mia May of Mia May Cosplay, and Simone on Instagram as Intensely Distracted. Please see our show notes for links to all their creations.
Seamwork Radio is brought to you by the Seamwork community, and you can find us at seamwork.com. If you have a story to share, send us an email at podcast@seamwork.com. We'd especially love to hear stories from those whose experiences often get left out of the conversation, whether because of race, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability, age, or any other reason. Again, that's podcast@seamwork.com. You can find us on Instagram at Seamwork and Seamwork Video on YouTube. We'd love to invite you to join us at seamwork.com. We have an amazing community there, as well as new sewing patterns and classes each month for members. Podcast listeners can get 50% off our unlimited membership, which gets you unlimited downloads from our library of over 150 wardrobe-building sewing patterns. Just visit seamwork.com/go/podcast50. You can also find that link in the show notes. And if you like this podcast, please consider giving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or the podcast app of your choice. It really helps other people to find the show so they can hear these stories too. Thanks for joining us, and we'll be back with you soon. I'm Sari Mitnick, and this is Seamwork Radio.